Oh, bye David, I'm really gonna miss you.
Oh, me too. I'm sorry for shit-talking you for the past 3 years, by the way.
Oh, it's no biggie, I still love you.
Oh, by the way, I'm not actually leaving for another 11 months, I'm just sort of officially leaving, so,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Great, can we talk about trade now?
As I record this, the UK is about 8.5 hours away from leaving the European Union, so begins the transition period, which lasts until the end of 2020, during which time the UK will supposedly negotiate a new trading relationship with the EU. Now obviously you're not going to get all that done in 11 years, so what's actually going to happen is either the transition period will be extended, or we will have no deal light on the 31st of December 2020. In the meantime, the UK remains in the single market and we continue to follow EU rules, so in a way, not a lot will actually change instantly. The biggest difference, in fact, is that if the UK were to want to cancel Brexit, we've gone from being able to revoke Article 50 with the snap of our fingers to actually having to physically rejoin all over again, something which would be incredibly difficult and complicated, yet many Remainers are already calling for. In my view, I don't think it'll ever happen. I think in the UK's absence, the EU will change. It will probably integrate more closely. The UK has always had a major part in shaping how the EU has grown. Without the UK, the EU will change, probably not to the UK's liking. Meaning that the EU that rejoiners will be arguing to rejoin will be quite a different EU to the one we're leaving now. Also, rejoining now from scratch will mean we probably won't get all the same benefits that we have now as members, like opting out of Schengen, opting out of the euro, our rebate. Basically, it will take a whole lot more energy to get us back in than it has taken to get us out. And I think there are better ways we could spend that energy. Because let's face it, the UK is in a mess. Austerity has damaged our society. Our healthcare and education are desperate for funding. The climate crisis needs addressing, and as I discussed in the last episode, we're also quite in need of electoral reform. These are all things I think would be a better focus of our energy in the future. That being said, whilst the battle for Brexit itself is over, the larger debate on the UK's trading relationship with the world will rage on, and it basically boils down to, do we want a closer relationship with America or with Europe? I think it's fairly obvious where I stand on that. Norway plus anyone? Anyway, moving on from all of that, I'm now here in Budapest. Next Monday I start my 8-week Hungarian language course. I'm just going to interrupt you right there, David. We now have breaking news. The UK is currently leaving the EU. We now go live to our correspondent David Frankal in Budapest. Thanks, David. I'm your Budapest correspondent, David Frankal, here in Parliament Square in Budapest, where there is not a great turnout for the Brexit celebrations here. Apparently, Hungarians don't really give a shit about Brexit happening. Yeah, not a big turnout. Interestingly, the lights, Parliament was lit up before. They have now been turned off. They might just turn them off at midnight normally. I don't know. But yeah, apart from that, not really much has been done to mark the occasion here in Budapest. Back to you in the studio, David. Thank you, David. Back to you, David. Since the last episode, I've spent New Year's Eve with my family in Zanzibar, and I've also spent 2.5 weeks in Israel. Starting with Zanzibar, where we spent 5 days. Zanzibar, today part of Tanzania, used to be part of the Omani Empire. Or more specifically, it was in a sort of personal union with the Sultan being the Sultan of Oman and Zanzibar, until he had 2 children who each became the Sultan of Oman and the Sultan of Zanzibar. We spent a bit of time in the main urban centre of the island, Stone Town, but I think the highlight of the trip for me was visiting the spice farm. This was a small business growing an eclectic mix of herbs and spices like cinnamon, cardamom, nutmeg, peppercorns and turmeric. But the best bit was at the very end where they sat us down and brought us all some fresh fruit. I mean literally fresh off the tree. Needless to say, it puts the week-old off the supermarket shelf fruit that I've been brought up on to shame. That fruit was an otherworldly experience. Fresh coconuts, fresh mangoes, oh, they were just amazing. Then I went along with my mum to Israel. My mum was going to take part in a choir trip with our old choir in Manchester. She was rejoining them for a few days. They did a few concerts in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I spent some time in Tel Aviv. I also visited Jerusalem, walked around the old city. I cycled along Train Track Park. and rode on the historic Jaffa to Jerusalem Railway. I also visited both original termini of the Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway in Jaffa and Jerusalem. Both are now abandoned but preserved. And I also rode on the newly constructed Tel Aviv to Jerusalem line, which does the journey in about 1/3 of the time, but it's not quite as scenic. I then headed north up the coast to the cities of Haifa and Akko, before heading north further still to the Lebanese border at Rosh Hanikra, at the kibbutz where my dad spent most of his gap year. There I visited the grottos, the cable car and the abandoned railway line. I then spent a few days in a different kibbutz further inland with one of my dad's cousins, which would have been lovely if it wasn't raining heavily the entire time. In fact, the entire 2.5 weeks I was there, the weather was pretty lousy, which is quite unusual for Israel. I reckon about as much rain fell in the time I was there than since the last time I visited in 2014. And then on the 24th of January, I hopped on one more flight to get here to Budapest, where I'm spending most of the rest of my gap year, also doing some interrail journeys starting here as well. Not doing any of that quite yet though, because it's winter and it's very cold, but on Wednesday I did take the train up to Esztergom on the Hungarian-Slovakian border. Magyarország, 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 Slovenska, Slovenska. I know, this is the first time I've uploaded an episode of the David Frankal Show this entire decade. I know, it's 2020, a new year, a new decade, a new era, a brighter and better future. So let's have a look at some of the major news stories in the last month. Oh my god, what the fuck? Yeah, so since the last episode, Australia has been on fire. Donald Trump has nearly started World War III again, this time by assassinating a top Iranian general in Iraq. And now the world is panicking over a major coronavirus outbreak in China. Let's just say if world news continues like this, we might not still be alive in 2030. Another major news story in the UK that has broken just in the last few days is that it has officially been confirmed that the Northern Rail franchise will be renationalised, or more specifically it will be taken over by the government-owned operator of last resort on the 1st of March. Just a month shy of 4 years after it was first taken over by Arriva. Now, obviously, many of the problems that Northern have experienced aren't Arriva's fault. We've had the late delivery of new trains, the delayed electrification to lines like the Bolton Chorley Preston line, congested infrastructure, especially the Castlefield corridor, and obviously being forced to implement a rushed timetable by the government. Whether you blame things like the Sunday staff shortage and the RMT strike action on Arriva or not, it's been pretty clear to see that Arriva has not been making a success of the franchise in the last 4 years. So even though changing the franchise itself makes very little difference on the ground, it was still about time to put Arriva Rail North out of its misery. It was the humane thing to do, after all. Yes, Interrail Episode 1 has still not come out. I've had quite a few videos I wanted to upload before that I've been working my way through, not least the Ghent and Amsterdam video, which was about a month late, and in the last week I've uploaded videos from Handforth and Brookside. Still to come is the day vlog video from Brighton and the Volks Electric Railway, and then I can get started on Interrail Episode 1, Belgium and Luxembourg, which I should hopefully have out on the 16th of February. I'm not going to lie, the size of the video backlog has been stressing me out a little bit over the last few weeks, so I'm not going to prioritise it on top of everything else, surely for the sake of my own mental health, but it will get done soon. The next episode of the David Frankal Show, recapping my first month here in Budapest, will be on the 1st of March. And then, as mentioned previously, the next episode of Train News should be out at the beginning of April. This week's Train Spot of the Week is a newly refurbished Metro 3 train in Budapest. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.